Hello, welcome back to the discussion of the paragraph unit. And what I would like to look at in this video is the important role of the audience and deciding who your audience is and how you should write for a particular audience. So follow along, please. The audience is something important to consider each time before you start writing. You need to plan not only what you're writing about, but you also have to consider who is going to be your reader. So that's a really important part of writing. Who is reading this piece of writing that you're producing? In other words, who is your audience? So writing for a specific audience allows the writer to directly appeal to the logic of the audience, to the emotion of your audience or reader, and to the values of the person who's doing the reading of your writing. So you want to consider these points: logic, emotions, and the values of the audience. So ask yourself the following question. If you can't figure out who is the audience, who are you writing this for? Let's take a look at some questions of how you can figure out by asking questions who your audience is. You could ask, for whom am I writing? Like, first of all, say who's going to be writing this? Who am I writing for? Why do you think the reader is going to want to read your writing? I mean, sometimes people have to read your writing. If it's a piece of work you're handing in for a class that you're taking, yes. But other than that, think about why somebody's reading your work. Also, what do you want your reader to know or to do after reading your writing? What is the demographic profile of your audience? You might look at the background. Where does your audience live? What part of the world are they from? Where is their geographic location? How will these factors influence your reader? And here are some factors to look at. The sex of the reader, the age, what's the educational background of your reader, the economic background, what is their ethnic background, their political affiliation, perhaps what are their religious views? What is the occupation of your reader? Is the reader a student, a professional, or a colleague? Because that can change the way you're going to write. And perhaps what are the hobbies, interests, or activities of the reader? Now, obviously, you might not know a lot of these factors, but if you do know them, then you should take them into account before you start your writing. Other topics to look at to help you to decide who your audience is and how to write for that audience. Ask yourself, what do your readers know about your topic? Am I writing on a topic that people have detailed knowledge about, or am I presenting information to an audience who knows very little about my topic? Because you need to know how much background information you have to include, or what kind of information to include. If the audience knows nothing about your topic and you're only writing a paragraph, then you have to select something a little bit more basic. If you know that they have quite a bit of background knowledge and information, then you would take a slightly different approach and include details that are a fair bit different than if your audience had no knowledge of your topic. Another thing to consider is, will my audience understand the language that I'm using? For example, if you're writing for a group of individuals who are, say, in the computer industry, the language that you use, which is called the jargon that's common to that field, as well as computer terminology and technical language, will not confuse your readers. So if you were writing something about the computer industry and you were writing to people in your line of work, in your industry, you can use certain computer terminology and more technical language and technical jargon because your audience would understand that. But if they weren't in your industry, you'd have to be careful of the kind of language you use because you don't want to lose your audience. Ask yourself, am I being sensitive to the values and the ethics and the beliefs of my audience? What is my reader's attitude toward my subject? Do you think your reader will be sympathetic to your point of view? Say to yourself, am I trying to gently persuade my reader? Will my reader be likely to agree or disagree with my ideas? Other questions you can ask yourself: have I surprised my reader? Have I been careful not to offend the reader? Also, what tone should I be using in my writing? Am I going to be humorous? Am I going to be lighthearted? Is it more of a heavy, a sensitive, a sarcastic? What kind of tone am I using? And the last pointer is, what is my relationship with the reader of my writing? Is it a friend that you're writing for? You'd write one way for a friend. You'd write a different way for a colleague, a coworker. You'd write yet again, differently for a professor or an instructor. Or is it even a wider audience where you can't answer all those questions? You're not really sure who's going to be reading it. So I'd like you to remember some of these points. Remember that as you're writing, you are presenting yourself in a particular way to your reader, and you want to be sure that your audience will have a lasting and favorable impression of both you and of your ideas. Writers produce their most effective writing when it's directed at a specific audience. So try to narrow your audience down. The more specific you can make it, the more effective your writing will be. So here are a few other things to consider. The first point, ask yourself, why am I writing this paragraph? Like, what's my purpose in writing? So the most common reasons that people write are, you might want to entertain. You're doing it for lighthearted entertainment. You might want to inform your reader about something that you know about, or you might want to persuade your audience to change his or her beliefs. So let's say you're a vegetarian and you're writing for an audience who probably would be a meat-eating audience. You would perhaps want to persuade by including a very significant, well-written facts so that perhaps somebody would be willing to sway or maybe even try a vegetarian diet for a while. So you have to figure out what is your purpose, and you'll need to decide whether it's more effective for you to explain something to your reader. Do you want to persuade your reader to your point of view and say that your point of view is correct? Do you want to just simply entertain? Are you writing a paragraph for entertainment? Are you just writing to tell a funny anecdote or a story? Or sometimes it's a combination of these methods, and that's what you have to decide. But whatever method you choose, it will help you to decide how you're going to present your details. And remember that what you say to your reader or to your audience is just as important as how you say it. So another thing to consider is, what is your attitudes towards your subject? Do you think your attitude will alienate your audience, or will it coincide with the views of your reader? You want to be careful not to alienate your audience. Your attitude towards your subject, as well as your purpose of writing, will influence your method of presenting your ideas as well as your tone of writing. So you want to carefully figure out what is your attitude. You don't want to come across too strongly. You don't want to sound like a bully or belligerent. You want to present your ideas with a very positive tone, and so you have to consider again who your audience is and how are you going to reach your audience. So how do you appeal to your audience? That's what I want to look at now, ways to appeal to your audience. There are different ways to appeal to your reader. If you're writing for a reader who you know already agrees with you, you need to decide what your purpose is. If you know your audience is not going to agree with your views, or most likely won't agree, you have to think very carefully about how to approach your topic. It's crucial that you approach it in a certain way if you know that your reader does not agree with you. Now, Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, assumed the existence of 3 appeals of argument, 3 ways to present an argument. And the 3 methods are the logical appeal, you're appealing to logic, the ethical, and the emotional. And a good argument should probably have all 3 of these argumentative approaches or appeals. But you try your best to see if you can incorporate these into your argument, into your paragraph. The first one is, how do you appeal to logic, logos? It uses logic. Appealing to logic or logos uses logic and clear evidence and claims to convince your reader of a certain point. It's using logic, all right? Facts, clear ideas, or logic to win your reader over to your way of thinking. Examples? You'd use clear proof and logical arguments. You could find sound facts and evidence, which include definitions, statistics. You could appeal to an expert authority or personal experience. Another way of appealing to logic is you're appealing to your audience's sense of reason. You're looking at your audience as being reasonable and having common sense and appealing to that. Another method is you can acknowledge the opposition. You can give reasons which are fully explained and clearly supported, and using appeal to logic in that way. And you can present a valid argument and make sure that you don't include any false or misleading evidence. Make sure your evidence is not false. Another way of winning over your reader is to appeal to ethos, or your reader's sense of ethics. That's used to show that you, the writer, is knowledgeable. So to appeal to that sense of ethic, you have to be knowledgeable, you have to show that you're fair, and you cannot be biased about the subject being discussed. You have to be careful the way you word things and not be biased. You have to be, and here are some pointers, you have to be fair and honest with your reader. You must be tolerant and respectful of other people's points of view. So somebody might not agree with you, but you have to come across as being tolerant and respectful, or you'll lose your reader right away. You have to be knowledgeable about your subject area. So research it, or make sure you're writing on something you're knowledgeable about. You have to be considerate and decent. You have to be confident in your position as well. If you're going to appeal to ethics and you're going to be knowledgeable and fair, you have to be confident in the way you present yourself. You can never ever be insulting, degrading, dishonest, or put somebody down or be dismissive. You must treat people as equals, and you must avoid exaggerating the truth or distorting the truth. So the key here is being honest, being fair, and being unbiased. Right, you got to consider all those things or you will lose your audience. Right? And then the third method is called pathos, which appeals to emotions. So in this type of appeal, you would be eliciting emotions and feelings in your reader. And this is a very powerful strategy in an argument because we're all very emotional beings, but you have to be careful. You really have to be careful if you're appealing to emotions, that you're not getting too sympathetic, that you're not misleading. Be careful that you're not deliberately misleading the reader. And this may happen if your logical appeal is not very strong. So when you're appealing to emotions, this is what it involves. You have to be fair in your argument. You have to use language and imagery to appeal to the audience, but appropriate language. You have to keep balance with your emotions. You can't be too overly sympathetic or have too much pride or show too much pity. You've got to always keep a balance. So keep your emotions in balance, and emotions can include sympathy, pride, humor, pity, idealism, nostalgia, like thinking fondly about the past or reflecting on the past, or patriotism. You must be careful that there's a balance here. Avoid stereotyping and avoid propaganda. And make sure you're convincing credibly rather than taking advantage of your reader's emotions. That is, you should never use fear, hatred, greed, prejudice. You must always try to remain on an even keel and do not take advantage of your reader's emotions. And lastly, you would be appealing to the reader's values, morals, and beliefs. So to conclude what I have discussed in this video on the importance of your audience and writing for a particular audience, is you must keep your audience in mind, and doing that will help you to determine how to approach your subject and your subject matter. Ask yourself, are you writing for your boss? Are you writing for your manager, for a professor, for a community member, for the editor of a newspaper, or perhaps you're writing for a general audience? Ask yourself some of the questions, review the questions which I have suggested in this video to figure out who your audience is, and please remember that your audience and the purpose of your writing will help to shape your entire paragraph. So remember to be respectful of your reader, be fair, treat your reader like an equal, and be careful of the type of language that you use as well. Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.